Dr. Clyde Wilcox from Washington, do you think Trump can continue to ignore these voices? And do you believe he can actually try to circumvent the CIA report? Can he actually try to ignore all this pressure that he's getting from the US Congress? What do you think?
In the foreign policy in Congress, and what's happened in the Senate is that several of the moderates have disappeared. So we've lost Bob Corker, we've lost Jeff Flake, John McCain is dead. So many of the forces that would have opposed Trump and made some effort to mobilize votes maybe against the arms sale are no longer in the Senate. And so the president's really in the driver's seat here. The Washington establishment clearly believes the CIA. I think most people in Congress do, but it's really difficult for Congress to push action, especially with the most powerful international affairs voices in the Republican Party now missing from the Senate.
Dr. Mohammed Al-Sharkawi, would the United States be decisive about its position from the Khashoggi case before the Democrats come with their majority come January? Is it likely that there would be a rift between the Democrats and the Republicans on this issue? Do you believe so? I don't believe in this duality, is that there is a Democratic platform or a Republican platform where Trump finds himself standing before. I think there is three platforms, because the Republicans are divided between that faction that is including Lindsey Graham, who are still holding to the values and principles of Abraham Lincoln and Roosevelt. These, they want to maintain the values and preserve the values of the party and try to gain immunity against the Trumpism of Trump, so to speak. I think Trump pushed towards extreme or far right. He sympathized with the Tea Party movement, and we started talking about radical rightists, including the Anglicans. We could say could constitute 1/3 of the Republican movement in the US. So far, he's a president who deals with issues with the support of 1/3 of the votes. Now, your question: will we be facing a scenario, surprising one, from now till January? This can happen only under pressure. I'm not talking here about the Congress, both Democrats or Republicans. I'm talking about the political establishment, including those who work under Trump's cabinet and they oppose Trump's orientations. I'll give you an example. Less than 48 hours of the press conference of the who tried to, what did the CIA do? They have leaked the content that there have been phone calls led to the conclusion that Mohammed bin Salman was the one who gave the green light to assassinate Jamal Khashoggi. I believe this kind of balance between the institution, even outside of the Congress, there are personalities, there are people who are concerned about the interest of America, American strategic interest, be it with Saudi Arabia or with the rest of the GCC countries or the larger Middle East. What we are seeing now is a movement in two opposing directions. Trump and Bolton are spearheading the movement that wants to provide a political coverage for Mohammed bin Salman. That's why we hear and listen to these justifications of $110 billion, and the Americans need to be concerned about such money or amounts should they go towards Russia or China. However, there are some other voices within the Republicans who are concerned of maintaining the minimum level of American values, which is the moral politics, so to speak. And I believe what we will see now is a reformist or a correctional movement in the foreign policy, particularly towards the GCC countries, and probably the Khashoggi issue would go out of Trump's control. It's larger than Trump's interests. It's in the interest of the both parties and the nation, and so the bottom line is that when Trump and Bolton sit together and recalculate their options and decide whether defending Mohammed bin Salman would be beneficial to them, would be useful for their elections, we have 714 days only to go. Either Mohammed bin Salman would become a liability, where we will find Trump acting in a surprising way, and the best thing known about Trump is that he is the president of surprises. Even Israel came in line with regards to the issue of Khashoggi's assassination. Israeli Prime Minister denounced such an act. However, he asked the American administration to maintain strong relations with Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince to Saudi Arabia. What happened in the consulate in Istanbul is horrible, and it has to be dealt with appropriately. At the same time, I would say that it's important for the region and the world that Saudi Arabia remains stable, and we must find the way to achieve both things. I believe the bigger problem is Iran, and I believe they shouldn't continue their nuclear and terrorist actions which they conducted in several European countries, and we have foiled 2 attempts in France and Copenhagen that has these plots were planned by the Revolutionary Guard. I believe deterring Iran, not only for the security for Israel, but also for Europe and the rest of the world. It is hard for me to take seriously the angry statements that such an incident caused, calling for a fundamental change in relations with Saudi Arabia. Giving that enabled Assad to kill hundreds of thousands and kill children with gas, and allowed Iranian diplomats to conduct terrorist acts to kill opponents or dissidents in Paris. I haven't heard any calls for fundamental change in relations. Therefore, I believe we shouldn't let such an action go without response. However, we need to be really careful so that we don't destroy a relation of strategic value. Saudi Arabia is not a country with which the U.S. shares values only, but also interests. With Saudi Arabia, there are interests. With Iran, there are neither interests nor values. Why? No.
So, Dr. Adnan, why all this Israeli support to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman? Do you believe the decision-making circles want him to remain in his position, albeit weak? And do you believe this might actually help them control him in a better manner and force him to make concessions? Or will the United States maintain the current equation, the equation of the strong Saudi ally, which might call for a change in the Saudi political regime? Saudi Arabia is part of the United States foreign affairs strategy. It is part of the foreign affairs strategy put forward by Trump and Kushner and their entire team, because after all, the main item on their agenda is putting pressure on Iran and imposing sanctions and maximum pressure, as said by Mike Pompeo in a recent article that he wrote. And of course, Saudi Arabia here can continue to play a role that it has played for a number of years, filling the gap in terms of oil production, the gap that was caused by the reimposition of sanctions on Iran. The other thing, in my opinion, is about the role that Saudi Arabia can play the role that was promised by Jared Kushner in light of the close relationship between him and the Saudi Crown Prince, the role that Saudi Arabia can play in the deal of the century between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Now, I believe this strategy, this U.S. strategy on the region could actually take a major hit if the current trend continues, be it in Syria, in Yemen, in Iran. Of course, there are a number of things in common. There is a certain alignment between Israel and Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries as well. However, going back to some of the questions that you asked about whether I foresee a change in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States, based on my observations, I did not notice that this relationship has changed despite the changes in the US presidents and Saudi kings. The relationship has always continued regardless of who is in the White House and who is in the royal palace in Riyadh. There was no radical change in the relationship. Saudi Arabia has always played a major and a pivotal role, so to speak, in the relationship with the United States. As for Trump, I believe he sees in Saudi Arabia a major source for jobs on US soil, and this is something very important to him, even though the numbers sometimes are greatly exaggerated. Sometimes we speak about 1 million, 2 million new jobs, while the jobs that have been created are maybe not more than 100,000. However, the confusing question is the following: why insist on Mohammed bin Salman, even though the United States are completely capable of achieving what they want to achieve, whether with him or with anybody else? This is probably the million-dollar question. Well, do you believe in the theory that says that any differences we might have might not ruin our common cause? I've always said that the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia is an extraordinary relationships on all levels. However, what we've seen in Washington is that the Republican Party has historically been the protector of the relationship with Saudi Arabia. However, today, voices are rising within the Republican Party, voices that want to destroy this personal relationship between Trump and Mohammed bin Salman while maintaining the official relationship between the two countries. So, when this mutiny against the relationship comes from within the Republican Party, I believe we should not take this for granted. We should not take this lightly. And I believe the next 2 years will see a number of changes and a number of impacts from the Jamal Khashoggi case on the relationship between the United States and Mohammed bin Salman. Now, this is just my point of view that I put forward for discussion and for dialogue. I don't have any political agenda. I just look at things from a scientific perspective, from my personal perspective, and I address things very freely. Of course, I am talking here about the rhetoric, about the things that are being said in the media, the statements that are being made by Republican members of Congress and Senate. Let us take Lindsey Graham, for instance, and the words that he used against Trump when he was running for president. However, after that, they changed their tone and they started begging for positions. Now, in the Arab world, there's a saying that says, sometimes we float on 2 centimeters of water. So any statement, anything that is said, we immediately take it into account and we start building theories and hypotheses and strategies upon them. And that is why I said we must always take these statements with a grain of salt. Statements on the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Even Lindsey Graham, whom I have been following recently, as well as all the senators, they have shown no reservations, be it on human rights or anything else. Their only reservation is concerning the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. Dr. Muhammad, obviously you have the right to comment. However, we need to continue, otherwise this will become a two-sided conversation.
Let Dr. Philip, let's talk about the GCC crisis, which is one of the key issues in the Middle East in light of the criticism directed to Saudi Arabia from congressmen for their blockade against Qatar. Do you believe that there could be a very near compromise or settlement for the Gulf crisis in the near future?
Especially when it comes to that, when it,
عندما
with, some of the Congress members who are involved, they certainly may try and put some additional pressure on Trump. How much influence there may be, most likely the administration would be looking more to see what the sort of internal divisions in the region are, rather than necessarily pressure from Congress members. And to a certain extent, it depends on which Congress members. So kind of to the earlier conversation on Lindsey Graham, say if it's a Congress member like Lindsey Graham, part of the president's party, but part of the party that has oftentimes been somewhat against Trump, they can say whatever they like. They can try and put pressure as whatever they like. But unless they can offer something, I'm not sure if it will necessarily have any influence on Trump. He's much more likely to be listening to his Secretary of State. He's much more likely to be listening to his Secretary of Defense. Most likely, in terms of the crisis here, they're probably considering it not only just in terms of what's going on with Qatar itself, but probably also how it might apply to the relationships between the Americans and Saudis as it could relate to the deal of the century. They're probably also thinking about it how it deals with, say, the potential increase of power of some place like Turkey, which could have strategic implications that the Americans may or may not like. Most likely they'll be thinking about it in those sort of terms. Certainly Congress members will try and put on pressure, but as others have mentioned, they can ask, they can even hold hearings if they want to, but primarily I assume Trump is going to be listening more to his inner circle of cabinet secretaries or advisors, and only look at, say, Congress members' influence depending upon the political saliency for the general public, which, again, in America, the political saliency of this particular issue tends to be moderately low, honestly. So he won't be necessarily thinking about it in terms of, is this going to be politically beneficial or not in terms of electoral results? And that means, at least given how he oftentimes seems to act, if there's not necessarily going to be an electoral benefit or cost, he seems to rely much more heavily on his advisors who seem less concerned about what, say, Congress members might say.
دكتور كلايد ويلكوكس من واشنطن، فيما يتعلق بالانتخابات أيضا، هل من الممكن أن تلقي بظلالها على الحرب في اليمن ويجبر الكونغرس الأمريكي الإدارة الأمريكية على الإسراع في وقف هذه الحرب برأيك؟
Well, so I've not been able to hear much of the conversation, so forgive me if I repeat something, but I want to make one point earlier about the Crown Prince, and that is that his strongest supporter is Jared Kushner. And I think there's probably at least a 40% chance that Kushner will be indicted. And so if that were to happen, then I think that would maybe be something that could change the dynamic in the Trump administration. In terms of the war in Yemen, yeah, the Democratic Foreign Relations Committee could, in the House, could be holding hearings about this, but really it's hard for Congress to pressure a president not to provide arms to the Saudis for the war. We've done this, as one of your guests has said, over time. It's not just Trump. And so Congress's power to limit the president in this kind of foreign policy is really pretty limited. They can raise public awareness, but public awareness in America of the rest of the world is not very high, so I'd say it's limited in the Yemen case, unfortunately.
Yes.
May I add?
لديك تعليق دكتور؟ تفضل.
I guess one thing I might add to Professor Wilcox's notes, ideas on this is, one thing that may also cause some limits, especially for the Congress, is if the focus is specifically on Yemen, this may be an area where neither political party will necessarily look good in it. That in effect, if there be pressure saying we need to pull back from Yemen, we need to pull away these sort of fundings, the sort of funding involved with it, almost inevitably one of the first questions that either Trump or some of the Republican Party will say is, that's great, why do you care about Yemen now, but not when it started under the previous president? Now, why do we care about Yemen now when people getting killed versus earlier? in effect, this is sort of one of those situations that both has low political saliency and where both political parties could end up looking pretty bad with it. And therefore, most likely, I don't think Congress is going to be able to put much pressure, even if they can get around some of the institutional issues.
هو آخر موقف أمريكي فيما يتعلق بالحرب على اليمن كان رئيس
The last position with regards to Yemen, Donald Trump on Fox News said, we want the war to stop in Yemen and I want from Saudi Arabia to stop the war. However, what about Iran? I also would like from Iran to stop the war. Dr. Mohammed Al-Sharkawi, on the 1st of November, the US started imposing sanctions against Iran, and after the elections, do you think that the American administration could reformulate its relationships with Tehran, at least not to escalate over the near future? I believe Trump's call to impose the harshest of sanctions against Iran is a relative matter, because it started with the need to stop the exports of Iranian oil and to prevent, including European companies that invest deals with Iran. However, we noticed that 4 months down the road after Trump's decision and the beginning of September, Pompeo said that there will be some exemptions, and this is a strong indicator that Americans' foreign policy towards Iran is not rigid, it's not static at a particular level, and that the tone and the term the harshest of sanctions, I believe it's I believe there is some sort of stepping back from such threats. There are also concerns over many other issues in the region. One of the advantages of Khashoggi's case is that has brought the attention of the White House and the president over many issues, because there is oversaturation in the political institutions, that if Donald Trump imposes harsher sanctions against Iran and against allies of the United States, the outcomes wouldn't be good. We need to recall an important element when Trump appears before the cameras and uses phrases and strong words against Iran. He's talking to his electoral base, which is 1/3 of the American voters. He's not focusing on Iran. Iran for him is more like is the sandbag, and Iran would remain the same up until 2020. But this doesn't mean that Iran's rhetoric would transform into a policy. However, Donald Trump 8 times requested to meet with Rouhani, so there is some sort of pragmatism with Trump. So if Iran shows even the slightest of signs that Iran is willing to engage in a dialogue, and instead of if they decide that they wouldn't go for the European Airbus but rather to the Boeing, I believe Trump would change. I believe Trump flexibility is.
Dr. Adnan, do you think there will be a change in the U.S. standpoint towards the Syrian crisis in the coming days and weeks? Well, if we look at the U.S. foreign policy, at the Trump administration's foreign policy towards Syria, we will notice that it has so far been reactive. And we've seen that with the use of chemical weapons, which was followed by the missile strike against Saudi Arabia after Trump held a joint press conference with King Abdullah and said that this is not acceptable. However, we did not notice that the Trump administration as well as the Obama administration had any viable strategy or any proactive strategy regarding the Syrian crisis. The United States did not also attend the Istanbul meeting, and we noticed therefore that there was not a lot of American attention. The ball is now in the Russians' court, particularly in the midst of the absence of European powers and the United States as well. So everything is happening now without necessarily the American approval. However, currently there are a number of issues that are coming up, such as the war in Yemen and so on and so forth. And we've seen these things not with the Trump administration, but with the Obama administration. This war started during the Obama administration, and it was not necessarily approved by the Congress. Also, another thing that we need to take into account is that President Trump does not read the intelligence report, and he does not read pretty much anything else. He does not read the reports provided by his own intelligence agencies, and does not read a lot of the literature and the reports provided on a number of these issues. And therefore, this is why we noticed that people, first of all, thought that this is because Trump is probably a president for the first time. He probably doesn't know what he's doing. However, it became clear with time that he is thinking of the United States. He wants to make America great again, like he said. He wants to isolate the United States from the rest of the world and from the European Union. However, he did not necessarily say anything. He did not make any declarations on these issues. Thank you, Dr. Adnan. We will now turn it over to the audience for the Q&A session. Please try to make your questions as short as possible. Introduce yourself and state the guest to which you're directing your question. Please. To whom? Thank you. Mohammed Al-Khamisi. I have a question for Dr. Sharkawi and a question for Dr. Hayajni. Regarding the Khashoggi murder case, don't you think that all the questions that were asked to senators, to congressmen, and to the president himself asking for comments on the Khashoggi case were questions that were raised by journalists? So the journalists made the effort initially, and they were seeking statements from officials. In other words, we did not get an independent, a pure statement, so to speak, either from Congress or from President Trump. So do you think this was a battle being waged by the journalists? My other question to Dr. Hayajni, you said that we can float on 2 inches of water. You said that earlier. However, for the first time in recent days, the CIA actually linked something to the press, regardless of what the president has been saying. And as we all know, the CIA first sends its reports to the president, and then these reports are given to the press. So do you think this leak to the press is some kind of opposition by the US intelligence community? Thank you. Thank you for your question. Thank you. This question is for everybody. There are no speakers in particular. I think anybody can answer my questions. My first question is about the way Trump sees Mohammed bin Zayed, his opinion of Mohammed bin Zayed. It seems to me that the discussion here and also other discussions outside of this event have always indicated that the relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia begins and ends with Mohammed bin Salman. However, I don't believe the economic side of things is that essential, even though money is very important for a businessman like President Trump. This is the first point that I wanted to raise. Second, if this is not the case, and I actually believe this is not the case, I'm talking here about the 100 billion or the 110 billion in terms of arms deals. However, there has been talk of $400 billion, and this is but a drop in the vast sea that is the US economy. We all know that certain US companies have a capital or spending that is several times this number. So I don't think economy is the sole reason why Trump is seeking to maintain his relationship with bin Salman and with bin Zayed as well. Now, of course, we don't want to focus too much on the Palestinian issue. However, I think the whole issue is about Israel and Israel's standpoint, because this man is the godfather of normalization with Israel, and I'm talking here about the deal of the century and things that go beyond the deal of the century. This is the main secret here. This is the main issue here, and I believe Netanyahu and those who support him have certain things that they are using to dictate certain things to Trump and force him to act in a certain manner. My other point, if you will allow me, is about the elections. The numbers that were put forward by Dr. Al-Sharkawi and the numbers that we've read in the press show clearly that Democrats got the majority of the popular vote, that the Democrats won the popular votes. The numbers were absolutely massive compared to the numbers that the Republicans got. And we know that in the presidential elections, the numbers tell almost a similar story. And the reason for that is the electoral system in the United States. Unlike many people think, I think the electoral system in the United States is not a democratic system. Why? Because it allows a small number of people, those who are elected to the Congress or the House, it allows those people to decide who is elected and who is not, while the popular vote in a number of cases is not always taken into account. And here a lot of things come into play, such as the population of one state compared to the population of another, and so on and so forth. So is there a certain direction nowadays? Is there a certain movement that is seeking this change that is required in order to achieve a true democracy in the United States in terms of the elections? Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks and respect for the whole speakers. I think that the conduct of Trump about the killing of Khashoggi is misconduct, procrastination, connive, collusion, something clandestine there. But my question to you, I am not concerned at all as a Middle Eastern about the American election, either midterm or presidential, because either red or blue controlling the White House or the Senate, they are the same. The foreign policy is the same. Three main pillars for the foreign policy. First, total prejudice for Israel with a full guarantee for security. Supporting totalitarian regimes in our zone. The third, which is important, refurbishing their economy and jobs. This is very important, what I'm saying, Sally. They know English. So, refurbishing their economy by selling to us arms, destroying our countries, making jobs against, this is a swamp.
So I believe the gentleman is begging for a question.
Thank you, Doctor. I would like to thank all the panelists. My question is, when you asked the question whether Khashoggi's case played a role in the American elections or not, and one of the panelists said that it has no impact whatsoever. However, we were following when Trump's campaign in the midterm elections, he was saying that it was a vote for him. He would promise Republicans and the Americans that he would bring money from Saudi Arabia, and he would say in his campaign that I spoke to the King Salman and I asked him to pay, and he should pay. Now, when Khashoggi's case became at the forefront, Trump's rhetoric shifted from asking for money from King Salman, but rather asking about the murder of Khashoggi, particularly after the boycott of what is known as Davos in the desert. I believe the entire plan which Trump has counted on has been disrupted, and that shifted from naming Saudi Arabia as the solution to all our problems to a rhetoric where Saudi Arabia has issues and we have to solve them. So please, could you comment a bit on such disruption in the Republican Party when the results of the elections which Trump named and described as a vote on his presidency, particularly that the elections, as Wagen mentioned, that the elections showed that the numbers of voters went to the Democrats and the Republicans retreated in terms of numbers, and the Senate doesn't reflect popularity, because we know that a Wyoming state which has 600,000 has representatives, whereas 2 representatives, and California with 40 million has also 2 representatives. So does this mean that the traditionalists would take control after Trump has taken it from them?
Assalamu alaikum and good morning, good evening. Dr. Ziaul Akshamsi this side. My question is to the panel, anybody can answer. I just want to have your opinion on the personality of the President Trump. Does the panel think that the gentleman has the capacity, the competence, and the capability to handle such complex issues like Syria, Yemen, Palestine, Jamal Khashoggi, and the domestic issues are also very important as far as US is concerned. What is panel's opinion on this? Are we betting on a right person, or we are just waiting for another 2 years to go into next general elections and see what the American people decide? Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا. تفضل، وليكن سؤال أخير وربما نعود مرة أخرى.
One last question and then we can have another round. Let's take one last question.
تفضل. ميكروفون.
Thank you. My question is to Mr. Clyde Wilcox. I hope he's hearing me because I cannot see his picture anymore. But also, Mr. Philip Gray, you are welcome to answer the question. The elections, according to some analysts, show that the focus on Trump's focus on what's called identity politics has really mobilized the Democratic Party against him. So whilst in the beginning it did mobilize his base in favor of him, however, its continuity has forcefully mobilized the Democratic Party and showed this vast move towards voting. Do you agree with the opinion that says that the coming 2 years will probably witness a withdrawal from identity politics and more focus on international trade and economic issues, and at the meantime try to look for common grounds with the Democrats on issues that could be of interest to the Democrats in order to secure what is called independent Democrats or Trump potential Democrats for the elections of 2020? Thank you.
شكرا جزيلا. يعني لو في نصف دقيقة الصوت النسائي الوحيد كنا قد أغلقنا الباب، لكن استثناء. تفضل.
Hi, this is for anyone on the panel. So I want to know that since we've always seen, like time and again, Trump's tweets asking the Saudis not to cut oil supply and trying to sort of keep oil prices low. How much does this matter in the upcoming midterm elections?
شكرا جزيلا. نشكر كل السادة على التعليقات والأسئلة. أعود لك سيد.
For their comments and their questions. Dr. Clyde Wilcox from Washington. I hope you can hear us. We start with the following question. Why does it seem as though President Trump is so attached to Mohammed bin Salman. What is the secret of this relationship? Is it Israel and the deal of the century? What do you think about that? Another question, will Trump remain attached to the identity politics or the politics of identity, or will he start focusing more on external or foreign issues in the next 2 years? I'm afraid we have lost contact with Professor Wilcox. Dr. Philip, if you can please start us off with those two questions, and then we will proceed.
Especially when it comes to the relationship with the Saudi leader, my own suspicion is probably that the role that he has in terms of the issues going on with Israel probably plays a pretty large role. Just because for any president in the U.S., if there could be some type of peace agreement between Israel and Palestine, that would be a large political benefit. Effectively, if someone who'd be running for re-election, if you could say I brought peace between Israel and Palestine, could almost sign his seat to be re-elected as president. So if he thinks this would help in terms of trying to create that stabilization, I can imagine that would be something that would be preferable. Possibly it may also be that he finds the leader's personality to be sympathetic in some sense, just given the sort of uniqueness of both Trump and the Saudi leader's sort of rise to power. That might be having an influence. In terms of identity politics, this is where I think we need to kind of keep the context in mind. Certainly, the Trump administration, the Trump campaign had focused on identity politics pretty significantly in the election period. But we have to keep in mind that identity... Wait.
عفوا دكتور فيليب عاد انا ودكتور كلايد دعني اتحول اليه ثم اعود.
Sorry, Dr. Philip. I think we've reestablished contact with Dr. Clyde. Let me go back to you later, but please let me first try to ask the question again to Dr. Clyde. So Dr. Clyde Wilcox, once again, what is the secret of the relationship between President Trump and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman? Is it Israel and the deal of the century? And do you think Trump will remain attached to the politics of identity, or will we see him turn more towards foreign issues in the next 2 years? Please, Dr. Wilcox.
So one of the questions was, does Donald Trump have the capacity to understand the complexity of Middle Eastern politics? And the answer to that, I think, is clearly not. But he does have some broad principles in mind, and he's getting a lot of advice, as I said, from Jared Kushner and also from Bolton. I don't know whether you guys have talked about this, but the big black hole of the next 2 years is going to be the Mueller investigation, which is going to consume Washington, D.C. in a major way and leave very little oxygen in the air. But I think if Jared Kushner is indicted, I think that Trump would probably be open to replacing the Crown Prince if that was something that, you know, seemed to be what the rest of his advisors were advising. He's not paying attention to the details of policy at that kind of level. In terms of identity politics, Trump has clearly crafted an identity politics campaign. So have the Democrats. Sometimes that helps one, sometimes that helps the other. One of the most remarkable things in this election was the large number of women. We have 2 new Muslim members of Congress. We have lots of people of color. It's a really diverse set of people coming in to the House of Representatives, and I think that's quite impressive. One other question that I wanted to address was about the electoral system. So Trump won the presidency with 3 million fewer votes than Hillary Clinton. The Democrats really should have had a bigger vote margin in the House, but for the way some of the districts are drawn in states like Ohio and North Carolina. They had a big win. It was a 7-point win in the popular vote. And even if you add up all 6 years of Senate elections, the Democrats have an advantage. So the electoral system at this point in time most certainly advantages Republicans. And their coalition is becoming more rural, it's becoming a little older, it's a lot whiter than the rest of the public, and so I think in the long run that's a problem for them.
Yeah. شكرا لك دكتور كلايد. دكتور فيليب لو تواصل الإجابة على الأسئلة تفضل.
In terms of especially identity politics, I think something we do have to keep in mind is while Trump has focused on that, identity politics is certainly nothing new in American politics. What is new, to be honest, is that the Republicans are doing it. That has become the difference. I mean, even if we're looking at, say, the conversation so far, we say we have more women, we have more Arab Americans, we have more people of color, this, that, and the other. The Democrats, in effect, almost the entire basis of much of their policy has been identity politics for over 20 years. There was one commentator years ago who had mentioned the point that the problem with identity politics is either no one plays or eventually everybody plays. What makes Trump unique is he's starting the process of everybody playing. This kind of gets also to the issue of the sort of election, so in terms of popularity. And part of this is, to be honest, sort of the shifting of what is considered important. So now the Senate is very undemocratic. When Obama had a filibuster-proof Senate back in 2008, apparently it was not undemocratic. There's a certain amount of partisan notions that have to be considered here. Now, in terms of the question, is America democratic? In a pure sense, no. It's never been democratic. It's always meant to be a constitutional republic. Part of this division in terms of popularity has effectively been to try and prevent some states from overwhelming others. Or the kind of conversation that's going on dealing with rural versus urban, generally the idea is, if you have a federal system, a system of where states can generally control how they want, Texas can live as Texas, California can live as California. When we talk about popular vote, effectively what we're saying is California and New York should dominate and basically tell the rest of the 48 states how to live. The Senate's purpose is to basically prevent that sort of situation. In terms of population, that's what the House of Representatives is for. But the Senate is to basically ensure that, just as going back to the founding of the American system, the original reason for the Senate was to avoid big states from effectively dictating to others and basically making the other states serfs. This is just playing out in a different way now, but it's not necessarily something unique.
شكرا لك دكتور فيليب. دكتور شرقاوي تفضل.
Thank you, Dr. Philip. Dr. Asharkawi, please. Why is Trump still attached to Mohammed bin Salman? I think there are three major reasons why. First of all, there's a personal reason, there's a confessional reason, and there's a political reason. The personal reason goes back to Trump's mental structure, so to speak. He's a person who's known for being short-sighted and for quick decision-making. He sits with his friends and he sees the things that he wants to see in their eyes. So he decided to bring US politics with all of their complexities into the club of the powerful, or the club of the strong. He wants to deal not with governments, not with institutions, and not even with international treaties. He wants to deal with Putin in Moscow, where he wants to deal with Duterte in Manila, he wants to deal with Sisi in Cairo, and so on and so forth. And I believe this personal relationship is what leads to this strong bond between the two individuals, Trump and Mohammed bin Salman. The second question is sectarian or confessional, like I said. And here, I believe it is essential for us to address the role played by Vice President Mike Pence. He is known for being an evangelical, and he's the representative of evangelical and Christian Zionists, and those are the people who mainly voted for Trump, and they met with him once a month at the Trump Tower in New York, and one of them actually offered $20 million to the Trump campaign, as well as $1 million to a team that was working for the Republican Party. So this group, these evangelicals, seem to be investing heavily in Trump and his administration, because according to their myth, according to their mythology, Trump is this political savior who will declare Jerusalem as a capital of Israel, and he will restore balance to their political world. They actually believe this, and they believe that the legend will become reality in Trump's mandate. The third reason is the political reason, and here we need to bring back Jared Kushner into the forefront. Since the beginning, Trump did not want any diplomatic or political veterans to be his advisors in the White House. He wants to maintain this concept that I talked about, the club of the powerful, and he wants to continue to deal with people as opposed to institutions. So far, it seems to me that Jared Kushner is the link between Donald Trump and Mohammed bin Salman, as well as other people such as Mohammed bin Zayed, for instance. So those people who believe in the idea that they have change projects, that they have strategies with common interests, so they can work together in order to try and implement these strategies. And a lot of voices in the Arab world are still wondering, when will this deal of the century or this slap of the century be declared? However, I believe this is already in motion. Things have already been set in motion. This deal is already being implemented through a number of projects and a number of deals. For example, there are whispers currently that Netanyahu might actually make his first visit in history to an Islamic country. So 3 reasons: personal, ideological, and political. And I think today, more than ever, it is clear that Trump wants to be Mohammed bin Salman's lifetime companion. Mohammed bin Salman wants the same thing to happen. He wants to be Trump's lifetime companion. So even if we admit that there's a strong bond between the two, we know that Trump relies on loyalty. We know that Trump relies on personal relationships. However, at the same time, he might turn at any given moment into somebody pragmatic, into a businessman who looks at gains and losses. And if he sees that Mohammed bin Salman will not help him get reelected or will cause him to be under further pressure, further political pressure, he will be more than ready to drop him immediately. So it's not a permanent relationship. It's based on those 3 foundations. And again, Trump is pragmatic and he takes his positions based on his interests.
A question on Al Jazeera website. Will the American policy that is biased towards Israel would shift with these elections, even to postpone the deal of the century? The Democratic Party has positions that may not be liked by the Israelis with the last decisions or actions taken by the Obama administration with regards to voting in the Security Council with regards to settlements. I think Obama was a good opportunity to achieve a lot in terms of the Middle East issue, and he has big promises to establish the Palestinian state in his keynote speeches in the United Nations. And the Democratic Party, which would always gain many Jewish votes. However, the U.S.-Israeli relations are deep-rooted, and it's more like of a thumb rule, and we can't see many fluctuations in such a relationships. Doesn't need much elaboration on that. I would like to respond to the question regarding competition or between the American institutions like the CIA and Jane Haspel, who has been in charge of the torture files in Iraq. There is a competition. There is always, in the American administration, throughout all crises, there is always competition between the Department of Defense and the Department of State. Who's closer to the president? Who's the closest is Kushner, because he managed to get rid of a state secretary of state, and even when they revoked the security clearance of Jared Kushner to attend such a clearance was given again to him. Now even Jared's wife is considering running for presidential elections, and she was there during the visit to Saudi Arabia. He has always been in the investigations during this crisis that the media is covering. With regards to the philosophy of the American political system in the Arab world, we don't have any democracies or legislations or legislatures, so it's difficult for us to understand the political system. American political system is based on democracy, and it's not the people's rule, but it's rather selecting decision makers periodically. Therefore, every 2 years they have an opportunity for elections. Not only re-electing, but there are also governors, not only congressmen and 1/3 of the Senate, but also governors and other positions. The idea is that not a single person can rule for life. Even Trump, his best chances is that he would be re-elected one more time only. We find that throughout the history of America that there have been only 3 cases in which a president who won in the popular vote lost in the electoral votes. But this is a problem that is there in the American electoral systems. However, there are some areas in America, some geographical areas where people don't have the right even to vote. So, as the doctor has mentioned, this is stipulated in the Constitution, so that the ruling philosophy should ensure representation of all individuals and 1 representative for each state and 2 representatives in the Senate. We would like to thank all the guests that has been organized by Al Jazeera Center for Studies and Al Jazeera Live in collaboration with Brookings Institute Doha on the US midterm elections and their impact on Trump's presidency and policy towards the Middle East. Mr. David, thank you very much for being with us here. Dr. Muhammad Al-Sharkawi from George Mason, Washington, and a researcher at Al Jazeera Research Center. Dr. Hayajna from Qatar University, and through satellite, Dr. Clyde Wilcox from Washington, from Georgetown University. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, this evening in this seminar, promising you to meet again in 1 month time, and thank you very much.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.